Hi, my name is Michelle Hayes. I am one of the co-presidents here at Chute Middle School for the PTA. I just wanted to point out that you are sitting in our newly renovated library that our PTA worked very hard to raise funds for. So kind of take a look around and ooh and ah over our cool furniture. And I want to welcome you to the district's forum on disciplinary literacy. And to that end, I'm going to introduce John Price, who's going to talk to you about it.
Great. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
And thanks to Kristen for helping to organize and for all of you being here. Real quickly, if you are here for the presentation on punishing children with books, you're in the wrong place. Totally different type of disciplinary literacy. That's not what we're talking about tonight. But if you're here to learn more about curriculum development in the district, you're in the right spot. And before we get going, I'd like to introduce Sheila Mary, who is the new Executive Director of the Cradle to Career in Evanston, and she has just a brief announcement for us.
Hi, thank you so much for just a moment. I hope that you're aware of Cradle to Career, but if not, it is a major collaborative effort of our school districts, our city, North Shore Health Systems, Northwestern University, and many of our nonprofits committed to ensuring that all of our children successfully reach adulthood and achieve their life goals and are successful and happy and healthy. And as part of that initiative, we are kicking off our first solution design team. There are flyers on the table. Our first meeting is going to be May 8th. It is from 9 to 11 in the morning, which I realize does not work for everybody. But if you're interested and can't attend that meeting, if you will let me know, we will be happy to get you on the list, and we will work to try to accommodate folks' schedules as we move forward. But we would love to have as much of the community engaged in that process as possible, figuring out how do we make sure this first team is going to be focused on community literacy, and how do we make sure that all of our young people can successfully read and that their families have the support they need to get us there. So thank you.
Thank you. ¿Tiene otro anuncio?
Buenas tardes, yo solo estoy aquí para decirles que la sesión va a ser en español, no en inglés. I was saying that I'm here just to let you know that the presentation is going to be in Spanish, so in case you need translation, let me know. Okay.
Great. Thanks very much. I think one of the first things that I learned freshman year of college is what an anxiety attack feels like. I remember sitting down for the first time in one of the large libraries and sat down with my history textbook and having really no idea how I was going to get through the 500 pages or so that I had to get through before the end of the week lecture. And I had history, and I had statistics, and I had some Spanish language, and I had my English course. I had psychology, and I did well in high school. I did everything I was supposed to do in high school. I wasn't the valedictorian, but I was awfully close. And I was not prepared for all of the reading and writing and all of the different types of reading and writing that I needed to do when I went to university. And so I think that at the foundation of what we're trying to do as a district and what's behind our thinking in disciplinary literacy is to get to that kid before he sits down in the freshman year of college in the library and doesn't really know what to do with Western Civ, let alone all of the courses on the schedule. And so we're here tonight with my team that I'll introduce in a minute to talk to you about disciplinary literacy, which is still a relatively new initiative for our district in a way that we are working to organize our curriculum and reflect upon our curriculum. So just moving across the room, Jess Reyes is the district STEM director.
Hey there.
Hey.
I didn't know if I was supposed to be like, hey.
You'll hear more from all these folks later. Dimitra Disitor is the literacy director. I won't pause for you to see. Patty Zortzis is the education technology director. And Jamila Pitts is our social studies director for the district. And Melody Mudarth has the night off this evening. And Jess is going to be covering for her. So let me talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing this evening. We hope that tonight you have an opportunity to learn what we mean when we say disciplinary literacy, what we're doing to implement the principles of disciplinary literacy across the district, and then provide some opportunities for discussion and some questions that we'll do our best to answer. It's important for us just to set up that this has been, as I said, a relatively new initiative, but an initiative that we are working on in partnership with the high school, with 202. And a way that we are using, a strategy that we are using to talk back and forth between 9th grade and 8th grade and 12th grade and 3rd grade. How do we provide some coherence and some consistency to our approach of reading and writing, habits of mind, frankly, more broadly across the curriculum areas. And so this is new, so it's a little bit risky to be out here talking about our new work, but it's also really important for us to be talking to you about our new work. This is part of the 2 districts' joint literacy goal that we have committed to. And just this year, we've done 2 observations with leadership teams from the high school and from the elementary school district. Did 1 day of observations over at the high school and visited a number of classrooms, and then spent a day at Haven visiting classrooms as well, social studies and science classrooms, which is in partnership with the high school where we are focusing our work initially. Disciplinary literacy in social studies and science content areas. And with that brief introduction, I'm going to hand it off to Dimitra. Do the clip.
Thanks. Oh, okay, it's already there. All right, so I think one of the things that we wanted folks to think about is, as you all know, we have the Common Core state standards, right, that have kind of shifted the way we are thinking about planning for instruction. And those standards speak to college and career readiness, right? And so when you think about career readiness, and we are thinking about what's in the 21st century, what are the skills and the prerequisites that we need students in the 21st century or college career-ready people to be able to function with in the 21st century. And when you look at those photographs or those images out there, just take a minute and think about what are the skill sets. You can just think to yourself, what are the skill sets that people need in order to be what looks like a medical team, or looks like an instructor down here. They're doing some investigations. They're a website designer, or chefs, or a media strategist, or an architect, or we don't even know yet, right? Because there are many careers that we are planning that we don't even know exist yet, but we're trying to prepare and educate kids for tomorrow. So I think that's a really important piece of the disciplinary literacy initiative. And we really want to think about what are the skill sets that students need in order to read, write, think, and talk as someone who's has expert knowledge in their discipline. And so with that, are you taking this next slide?
I can.
Or do you want me to? With that, we're going to give you a little quiz, okay? So I'm going to give them this.
Not a technology quiz.
Yes. So who am I?
Right. So we're going to take a look at job responsibilities. So in this case, this person has to plan, visualize, select, synthesize, and develop solutions for clients, form simple diagrams to show relationships between spaces and activities, prepare 3D models, prepare and present to clients, offer solutions, explain and persuade, prepare construction and office budgets. They must be able to understand structural analysis, heat loads, electrical distribution, and traffic flow, problem solve and support various groups of people through various stages from conception to construction, and writing is detailed and precise and may include drawings and measurements. Would anyone like to take a guess? Yes?
Architect.
Okay, great. Is there anything else that you might think of? Something that feels right. Architect is what we were thinking about, so that's who that person is. So in order for the architect to be successful in the 21st century, these are all of the things that they have to do. And when they approach reading and writing and everything, they're looking at it through this lens. Okay, let's try one more. Okay, job responsibilities. Follow directions precisely. Understand the effects of combining certain elements. Work as part of a team. Think creatively about how certain elements might go together. Be willing to experiment. Prepare for project by organizing all the materials and ingredients needed. Problem solve when progress of product is not properly monitored. And writing is precise and procedural. Will include measurements and pictures. Writing can also be creative and decadent. Any answers that you'd like to try out here? A chef, okay, great. And does this make you think of all those television shows now, like Chopped and Kids, right? And look at that from this perspective. So you all passed the quiz. So these are the kind of things that we're talking about. And as you can see, it's not just reading for reading's sake. You have to read with a purpose. Questions? Okay. So now let's take a look at the language of a flower. Okay? I'd like for you to take a few seconds, turn to the person next to you, and describe this image in your own words. Talk amongst yourselves. Sharon. This is an activity we're involving you, please. But great, yes. I hear a lot of wonderful conversation, a lot of descriptive words, a lot of different ideas coming out. Now I'd like you to talk to the same people, only this time I would like you to describe the image taking on the role that you were assigned. So let's say, for example, that you can pick up your own role. You can be an artist, you can be a mathematician. Pick a role. You know, you can be an architect, scientist. So think of a role that you want to take on, and now using that role in your mind, describe the image taking on that role. And how would you describe this picture differently? So take a minute to think what role you want to take, and talk amongst yourselves again. Okay, a poet, there you go, that's great. I see you're not talking to someone, so I'll talk. Okay, so let's say, pick a role.
Fashion singing from it.
Everyone had a chance to talk to someone? Great. Okay. So let's regroup. I heard some very interesting different perspectives here. So now my question to you is, based on we described the same thing, one picture, it's the same picture, but we described it in different ways. So what did you find different about the second description that you had? What were your observations? How did you go about describing this image, taking on the role that you were assigned?
Specialized.
I'm sorry?
I said it was specialized to that person.
Okay.
To that profession.
Okay, so and what role did you take on?
We became botanists.
Okay, and so what was different about looking at this from that perspective than just describing it in your own words?
We used much more specific vocabulary, much higher level vocabulary that was specific to what a botanist would need to use.
Mm-hmm. Great, fantastic. Anyone else had a different role? I heard people were poets. I heard someone else saying that they were a historian or something in science.
Photographer.
Photographer. Where's okay? So how did you describe it?
Oh, we
differently?
just suggested that would be another view you might take of it. We didn't go into.
Okay. white balance and those kinds of things.
Perfect. And so that's specialized vocabulary right there that you wouldn't necessarily use when just describing it in your own words. Okay? So that's kind of the idea, the foundation of what we're talking about when it comes to disciplinary literacy. Okay? Next, we're going to pass the torch.
Thank you. So that was really fun. I was actually doing the poet and I was using alliteration. Pretty purple petals is what I was. I proceeded to try to go make a poem out of it, and then my time ran out. So I was really upset about it.
We'll give you more time.
Yeah. So right, I need more time. So this slide really kind of encapsulates a high-level idea of some 21st century skills that we would seek to develop in students. And that are specialized. So when you take a look at it, there are some definite literacy-based things, but then as you think about and reflect the activity we just did with these describing the image, you can also think about this in terms of, ideas as they kind of emerge in different roles and that folks will play in their respective fields. So valuing evidence and independence, using technology, which ends up being a much more critical skill in this day and age. But what does all this really lead to? I mean, we've been going over a lot of these slides to really get to what is disciplinary literacy. And so John mentioned earlier the work that we're doing in partnership with District 202. And so really quickly, without having to go very verbiage heavy, the idea here is it's about developing habits of mind in a given discipline. About the idea of investigating, reasoning, writing, talking, problem solving, and doing it in the way that specific practitioners do. So when you think about, I think the conversation about the photographer, and it wasn't so much about describing the picture, but how you might look at it from a different vantage point, is the same kind of idea here. What would that practitioner do given a particular problem that they're facing? And that it integrates communication strategies and development of these habits of mind to really build specific discipline, content knowledge, and skills. And so a lot of this comes from, actually before I do that, I have to give credit where credit's due. This is the definition that we jointly developed between 202 and D65. We sat down for quite a bit, thought about the work that we were doing, and really leveraged this text, Content Matters, as a central key text that we're using to really develop our capacity in this. And from this really emerges these 5 principles of disciplinary literacy. And the red box that you see around principles 2 and 3 are really highlighted to get at this idea of how that might start to transform the classroom. And that is that learning is apprenticeship, which is a little different idea. So for learning in science, we're thinking about how we're apprenticing young scientists. And we approach it from that perspective. But then if that means that we're apprenticing young scientists, then that means the role of the teacher then has to reverse as thinking of themselves as a mentor of young scientists. And so from the same text, Content Matters, they really talk about this diagram of teaching and learning on the diagonal, where the vertical axis really represents growth in content knowledge. So what are the content-specific things that one would need to know to be X or Y? No pun intended. I know, it's really ingrained in there. But then the horizontal axis really being growth in habits of thinking, the piece around that. But then this teaching and learning on the diagonal really get at this sweet spot of how do we not be too much about just the content knowledge, and how do we not be too skewed towards these habits of thinking, and how do we integrate those two pieces, finding that sweet spot where students are really immersing in their learning. And so this really gets to this idea of a disciplinary literacy framework that Demetra will talk about.
Okay, so this image or this diagram is often what educators are seeing when the notion of or the idea of disciplinary literacy is being presented today. And you can see basic literacy, intermediate, disciplinary, so you would think that it obviously it builds on itself. And as I've been writing my notes and thinking about this slide in particular tonight, I continued to start with the basic level 1 and then level 2, level 3. I'm going to take a risk right now and actually work backwards, because I think as we talk through this process, we want to think about where we're going to end, which is disciplinary literacy, and making sure that students leave middle school and high school being prepared to be part of the conversation in a specific discipline. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to necessarily go down that road, but our job is to make sure that we've provided the environment for everybody to think and be exposed to the thinking in that discipline and the tools of the trade. So if we think about what Jess was saying and what we keep talking about, that notion of that habits of mind, we want to make sure that we're developing the habits of mind from that disciplinary stance. And we want to make sure that I love this notion of teaching them the habits of mind as an insider or inducting students into the thinking, not standing on the outside and looking in at a content, but actually thinking and exchanging ideas just like people that are in those particular trades. We want them to interact with text the way an expert in the field would. So in order, if that's our goal, then the idea or the instruction that precedes that is making sure that students have a strong enough academic vocabulary in order to begin to exchange ideas and learn how to navigate those conversations, that they really that they're continuing to grow their background knowledge, because we know that background knowledge and exposure to the world around them and conceptual understanding is so key in helping to, learning begets more learning. So we have to make sure that we have to continue to expose kids, like Jess was saying, not just to the content, but how does that content connect to the world around them. And so what we do in those intermediate grades is we want to teach them more general supportive thinking strategies that do cross all content areas, such as summarizing or questioning. How do you interact with text? How do you set a purpose and interact with text on a very general level? Those general strategies then can be honed into the disciplinary literacy specific at the top level. Prior to intermediate literacy is basic literacy. And typically, I almost wish these were not solid lines. They almost need to be more like dotted or dashed lines. But typically at the basic level, we certainly are thinking about our earliest readers. So we're thinking about all those traditional foundational skills that we know students need to have in order to access print. However, we also know that, again, students have to continue to expand their knowledge, and vocabulary is such an important piece of that. So making sure that students have lots of opportunities to engage in ideas and talk with one another and practice learning and practice vocabulary and practice thinking with one another and listening and knowing that knowledge is a co-construction. It's not just done in isolation. It's ideas that are exchanged with one another and built upon. So that really is what we're trying to get to in terms of our practice and how we're thinking about what we're doing with our students, in the classroom and across the grades. And I think I can't move on to.
Yeah. So, as John mentioned earlier, we're very much in the early stages of our learning on disciplinary literacy. And so what we wanted to be able to illustrate for you all today were some takeaways around specific content areas, what they might look like in disciplinary literacy, and to try to get a smattering of different grade bands. And so in the disciplinary literacy in science, it really gets right back at thinking about the learning that we're doing as scientists do. So what you'll notice here, and I realize this is text heavy, but it's really about conducting scientific inquiry, analyzing, applying in that kind of a context. This triple Venn diagram, though difficult to see, really the high level on this is that the habits of mind that Demetra spoke about are really evident in the work that we do in mathematics, in ELA, English Language Arts, and in science. And the intersection of this triple Venn diagram really gets at all of those habits of mind kind of coming together and how that really supports the learning in science classes. And so in a middle grade science experiment, for example, a student might take the mindset of a reviewer for a scientific journal. And so this really starts to get at the disciplinary literate nature of this work. And so if I'm thinking as a young scientist, I'm reviewing the scientific journal with that vantage point. I'm asked to review an experimental setup, to identify variables, perform basic data analysis, and then the final product is to put it together, synthesize it in a letter for a scientist. So the shift here is if you remember in science class in 7th, 8th, 9th grade, please memorize the number of bones in the body and all the different parts. Very different kind of application of the skills within the habits of mind. Jamila will talk about disciplinary literacy in social science.
Thanks, Jess.
Absolutely.
Let's hope I can click well. So we often talk about thinking like a historian. Yeah, thank you. The College and Career Civic Life is the C3 framework developed by the National Council of Social Studies. So they're giving us a nice example here about the reasoning that a geographer might do. So what I want to show you is an example of a task that we have for our students that's already in our curriculum, but that we're going to make sure that we approach it in a way that we're building these disciplinary literacy skills. So the student at the end of the first unit in 3rd grade, which is about math study, they have this task. You've been selected to develop a new town. The town should be, the town hall should be located in the center of the map. Your map should extend approximately 4 blocks north, south, east, and west of the town. So they have to conceptualize what their town is going to be and then represent the way a geographer would this town. And then they have to pick 2 landmarks and use cardinal directions to describe. So we're bringing in the precise language that a person from the discipline might use. And so we have here for you a couple samples of how the students actually enact this task. And this is going to be shared for you so you'll have a time to look at it really up close and personally. But a student did this on their own after looking at the task and understanding what it was that they needed to do. But you can see that they have a nice theme here. It's Candy Town, and they've named all their streets with all nice candy names. They have what you must have for it to be a map. They've got a map key. They have the landmarks. They've got a compass rose in there. We've got another one coming up. This one is Horse Haven Town. You'll see they have some natural resources there. They also have a key. So you can see that they understand the necessary elements that a geographer would include if they're representing a space. And that's the kind of task that we want to have for our students. And I'm going to pass it on to.
So I'll come back up for math. So within Everyday Math 4, this is the vantage point of a K2 student. Our 4th edition of Everyday Math, we've started to implement this year, has a very unique feature called the Open Response Re-engagement lesson that happens in every unit. And what that does is it really digs into a really rich and rigorous task. And quite frankly, when you're thinking about disciplinary literacy and you're thinking about putting students in the frame of a young mathematician, which is what would be happening here, it's really about what is the situation that's posed for a child to be able to grapple with the mathematics. So it really starts with a rich task. But what I wanted to point out here is that in our standards for mathematics, there are 2 types of standards. There's the content standards, and then there are the practice standards. And basically, it is content and habits of mind, referring and hearkening back to the earlier slide of this learning on the diagonal, is making sure that we do not disentangle the content aspect and the growth, the habits of mind that are necessary for students to really understand the mathematics. So here is an example of an open response task for a student in 1st grade, I believe. And so it really starts off with, Mr. Khan has a pack of 18 pencils. He wants to give 1 pencil to each child in his writing club. There are 7 girls and 8 boys in the club. Does Mr. Khan have enough to give each child 1 pencil? Use words, numbers, or pictures. Multiple representations really starts building this foundation very early in mathematics. Extending the problem. How many pencils will Mr. Khan have left over? Show or explain your answer. So what's important to remember from earlier in the slides is I talked about this one major piece around learning as apprenticeship and teachers as mentors. And what's important to understand here is that we've got a rich task here for students that's appropriate for their cognitive level at that grade level. And then we think about what is the role of the teacher. And so without going very deeply in this, it's really kind of supporting, now that I'm thinking as a teacher, and I'm thinking in the perspective of supporting my math students, what are the types of questions that I ask of students to probe, to really mentor them, without necessarily giving them the farm and saying, you know what, here's the answer, and I'm going to funnel. And I really want you to struggle, and I really want you to persevere with that, and I really am going to ask the kinds of questions that really get at that. And then the students really discussing with one another, and what is the role that the teacher thinks about in their mind as they're facilitating a lesson, and how they want to position themselves and their students to really think as young mathematicians. And then the idea is to also equip with sample student work. So you might have remembered earlier in the slide I said it's a 2-day lesson, open response and re-engagement. What's important about that is that a student has the opportunity to just grapple and roll up their sleeves like I have today with the mathematics and just go for it. But it's also this other piece where it says, now I've got this work, different ways that students have approached it, and it gives the teacher the opportunity to say, I'm going to look at this expansive work in front of me, and what is the story that my math class tells me about where I need to go next? To re-engage them in the work that they have already done, and think about how we continue to build students' understanding of the mathematics. And what's key here in this rubric is students would go over this, but what's interesting about what teachers are able to do is to be able to share with students different pathways, different ways of solving a particular problem. And in that discourse, in that conversation, is to build the kind of basically habits that mathematicians do when they typically start with a problem. They don't just say, all right, I solved it, done. It really is this iterative process that goes on over and over again. So this is kind of that snapshot that we think about very early on in mathematics.
And so what is disciplinary literacy? What are the habits of mind in literature, in our literature ally classes? And I'm going to, for right now, I'm going to focus more in this intermediate and disciplinary literacy portion of the triangle. And really, like it says there, we really are looking for students to, we're looking to help bring students to a really deeper understanding of the literature that they're reading and look at the themes across stories or the patterns that are repetitive across multiple stories or multiple genres. We're looking to really help students understand how to look at a piece of text critically, like a literary critic would do. And to support that, what we do is we have students multiple times during the course of the year really digging into a piece of text and doing literary analyses over the course of the year. They're asked to compare modern day versions of fairy tales to the Grimm brothers fairy tales. Those are it sounds kind of light, but it really is pretty powerful when the students have to look at the themes and the motifs that are represented or not represented across two different versions. That's some pretty complex thinking. Students are also asked, when they're reading historical fiction, to research the informational period, the actual historical time period that those stories are taking place in, to see, number one, to what extent the story is being portrayed accurately or not, where is the author taking license, or number two, how is the author, to what extent are things being compared across, what am I trying to say? Looking at the historical content and then also looking across making sure that the time period is accurately represented. So those are some of the things that we're asking students to do, and that's, again, some really pretty deep thinking, and we want to continue to push students to do that. So when we look at our curriculum over time, we're looking to make sure that, in literature especially, things are connected and things are scaffolded and increase in complexity over time, and the expectations for the students continue to increase. So that's what it looks like, what literature looks like at the upper end. I'm going to actually go back in this next slide and back to basic literacy. And I know some of you, especially at the younger grades, you may be wondering, what does disciplinary literacy look like in the youngest grades? And we have a video because there's no way to capture what it looks like and for me to stand up here and tell you that. So I want you to just kind of sit back and take about 1 minute and 30 seconds to just watch what it looks like and sounds like as students use the tools of the trade, as they use the language and the vocabulary to build their knowledge and connect it to things they already know. So, thanks, Jess.
Okay, Beckett.
Soft, because this is all stuff that's kind of like soft and fluffy and silky stuff. It should go right here, and hard should go next. And then it likes it gets hard, then softer until it's like silky. Silky, fluffy, soft, smooth, scratchy, rough, hard, and rigid. And rigid is thick, and hard is kind of hard. Like when you try to break something, it will hurt your hand because like.
Sometimes I get a good feeling, yeah. And a feeling that I never had before. No, I get a good feeling.
Can't say it any better than that. That's what it looks like and sounds like in a primary classroom. And we want to capitalize and continue to build on that. And you can see that sort of support through instruction over time. You can see where the students, how supportive and how empowered they'll feel over time. And then all of that knowledge, again, collectively builds to that disciplinary specific language and the more critical lens that students will look at the content through over time. So, yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. So disciplinary literacy, what does that mean for English learners? You know, as a language teacher, this is really important for me. So taking a look at this, you're developing students' academic language across content areas, and we're looking at basically your listening, speaking, reading, and writing, okay? Experiential learning opportunities are key, just like we saw in that video. You know, they're doing the work, they're acting as that role. There's an extreme critical attention to vocabulary instruction. It's a wonderful opportunity to bring in these rich words and make it meaningful for them. And obviously they're incorporating the Wheaton Language Development Standards into the units of study. So these are not done in isolation. These are all done together and collectively. And it's important to recognize and to address, like, what does this mean for the English learners? Because that's extremely important in language development, understanding all of these things.
So I think you've seen some of the most important things, some of the examples of what this does and what this will and can look like in our classrooms. Authentic tasks, work school that feels like real tasks and real work and engaging things to do. And stuff that's not just hard. Naming all the bones in the body, that's pretty hard. It's not very complex. It's not intellectually challenging and stimulating. So it's not about just doing things that are harder, but tasks that are authentic and complex, that don't have one right answer, is one way to put it. Students put their learning to use and builds the background knowledge for all of our students. The more you know, the easier it is to learn. What's next? A simple truth. So we need to, from our earliest grade levels, be very conscious of building background knowledge in really rich content, science and social studies that's integrated. We're just talking about this today, that's integrated throughout, so it doesn't feel like reading class and writing class and social studies class and science class, but that this background knowledge is being built very intentionally throughout, so that our children are ready for these complex demands. And it gives opportunities, doesn't guarantee this is hard work for the teachers, but it gives opportunities to develop 21st century learning skills as well. Collaboration, communication, creativity, critical thinking. And as we were going through this today, and I was really thinking about what does this really require, thought about maybe another night, Kristen, we can come back and talk about executive functioning as well, and organizing one's own thinking and learning as well, which is another part of our strategic plan. I think these things work really well together in concert. So what's next? We've said twice, I'll say a third time, we're beginning this work. This is a process that we're just on the cusp of. But department chairs, this has started, so we're beginning to ripple out throughout the district. So district leadership in 65, We've been doing our own professional learning community and book study around disciplinary literacy this year. Every other Friday, we're talking about a chapter of our book, talking about how we solve problems around this. Department chairs have gotten a touch of it, and some of the departments have done have gotten farther already. I had a great chance to work with Jamila and the social studies team, and they did some disciplinary study, and they kind of got behind the camera, if you will. Now, what would happen if you did this work with students? Really start talking about disciplinary literacy. Collaborating with other school districts. We talked about 202, but begin reaching out to other school districts as well. And then you got to plan to facilitate professional learning for all of the teachers in the district. So this is going to take time. We got a 5-year strategic plan, and we are beginning, and really appreciate your attendance here tonight so that you have some ideas. And I think we've got a few minutes for questions for the team, comments. Love to hear.
So
Thanks.
you mentioned third grade with social studies. Is each department starting at a certain grade level with disciplinary literacy, or is it?
We just gave examples so that you could see across the continuum, so I just happened to select an intermediate example task.
Okay. So, but is it going to
Yes.
start with kindergarten? Is it when you start implementing it? Are you doing it sporadically now as kind of experiments, or?
We're not doing it sporadically now. I think social studies and science in the year that comes is really going to be focusing in 6th through 8th grade.
Okay, so it's
Focusing
going to
their work
start
there.
in middle school.
And we'll start there. And we've got part of the reason for that is that Jess is leading a tremendous amount of work next year around K-5 with a new mathematics curriculum adoption. And then Dimitri is going to be leading a lot of work around literacy focused on pre-K to 2. So we've got to stay out of each other's way. And we've got to make sure that we're not asking teachers to learn 6 new things in 1 year. That doesn't work real well. So we're trying to stagger the learning and stagger the professional development around disciplinary literacy, professional learning.
Would you consider trialing and doing a pilot program for a particular subject, maybe in a particular school, to see, get all the kinks out? Teachers can kind of, you have a core group of teachers who will then have been trained and who can help, problem solve and help train other teachers if it's rolled out beyond that. Have you thought at all about doing a more staggered rollout to maybe, enhance the chance that it will be successful?
Well, I'll call on a couple people to talk about pilots that you're running around a couple of things, but I think that the way that we're going to be using disciplinary literacy is not as a thing, is not as a pilot, but as an understanding and an approach to all of our curriculum projects. So everyday math is being rolled out to every school in the district K-5 next year. Some schools started this year K-3. K-2. So we're doing everyday math. Decision's been made, and we're moving forward with that. Disciplinary literacy helps us to be asking each other questions and asking students questions in a focused framework of understanding, help us understand our curriculum in a different way, and hopefully, we believe, a deeper way as well. So I don't feel like disciplinary literacy is a program. It's an approach to curriculum design and curriculum development that we plan to apply across the curriculum over time. But you wanted to jump on that. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
no, I would agree. I think that was characterized really
Yeah.
well. It's really about the shift in our practices across the continuum, K-8, and as I keep going back to the triangle, but it looks different over time, and the levels of thinking and the ways in through the content change over time. So, for instance, one of the things that we're doing in our district with a core of teachers across the district in K-3 is we're piloting a Making Meaning project, and what that support is really doing for us is really focusing us on one of the things that I spoke about in the triangles, building background knowledge and academic vocabulary, and helping students learn how to engage in those discourses. And the Making Meaning model right now is really a strong support for teachers in the classrooms that really helps them learn how to help the kids engage in the conversation. How do I turn conversation over to the kids so that they can take on the learning? And it's not just the teacher at the front of the room, but it's really about helping the teacher become a really strategic facilitator of conversation so that the kids, as I said earlier, are co-constructing meaning. So that, again, as things ramp up across the grades, they are comfortable in those venues, you know? So it really is about making sure that approaches to instruction are similar across the grades, that we have an expectation that there's lots of turning and talking and engaging with each other and, you know, arguing in the argumentative sense, and working through ideas together. So that's the framework, I think, that we're trying to get to even at the youngest grades, you know, what that looks like even with little guys.
Jamila, do you want to talk TCI or no? Yes, and then we'll go back to Jeff.
I was wondering whether every curriculum is equally suited to the disciplinary literacy approach. For example, Jess, you mentioned bringing in everyday math, and obviously that works. If there were other curriculum choices, like Singapore math or some other kind of approach, are they differently able to handle the disciplinary literacy approach, or like readers and writers workshops? Are some curriculum choices better designed to work with disciplinary literacy than others?
I mean, it's a good question. I mean, ultimately what you want to be able to have, and I think John touched upon it in one of his slides before this one, is really rich and rigorous tasks. And if you, when I think about it from the term, I'm going to speak in the context of mathematics, but I think this pretty much applies across, is really the content is important to have, but it really kind of goes right back to Demetra and John's earlier conversation about how we take such rich curriculum or rich content and then be able to think about the teacher practice and how that supports learners in getting that. So it's one thing, quite frankly, to plop open a book in front of a kid and say, go do it, and it could be the best, you know, instruction materials in the world, but if the teacher's role in this is extremely important. So, I mean, to answer your question, really, in the end, it ends up being, we feel pretty confident in our materials, and really the other pieces around how we support our teachers in continuing to make that come to life for students in this kind of way.
Did that get to your question?
Yeah, I think so.
Great. Jennifer, and then your question.
So I'm curious about where else this is being tried, whether in Illinois or around the country, and kind of what early indicators of effectiveness you have and how something like this would be evaluated for effectiveness. And then a second question is, how is this different?
That was one question?
Sorry.
I had three questions
Three-part
there.
question. It's where else is this being tried, and how do you know this is the right bet to place?
All right, so where else is it being tried?
There
Research to support, and then indicators. So we can go 1, 2, 3.
Yep. It's being tried everywhere, and I'll say why.
Can you be
So,
more specific?
yes, absolutely. I will expand upon that for you. What was really interesting, and John mentioned earlier, that our understanding of this is developing over time. And as we read the literature, what resonated so much for us, and I could see the nods as we were having conversations internally about the reading that we were doing, particularly when we were talking with D202, was like, this really is, quite frankly, what the Common Core Standards is asking of students. It is asking for students to be able to use these habits of mind, to be able to grapple and think about how we're preparing students for the 21st century. So when I say that it's happening all over the place, each district may not formalize it as disciplinary literacy, but in every sense of the word, preparing students for career in life, that's really what's happening here. And what this allows for us is a nice lever to be able to have a very frank conversation, not just around the Common Core, but around how we're really thinking about this learning as apprenticeship and teachers as mentors, to really hammer that home as really critical to the work that we're doing. So it's not disconnected from Common Core. It's not disconnected from all the things that we're doing. Rather, it complements and really starts to put it together in a nice framework.
I would say that disciplinary literacy is actually a phrase used in the Common Core. It is actually cited. And so that's where it was lifted from in the first place when we first started these conversations. So it is in there. And the research is newer. The conversations around disciplinary literacy have been around since like the late 90s. But then in the 2000s is when some of the educational researchers really started being much more explicit about ramping up informational reading and what it means to, like I said earlier, to not just be an outsider and have these generic, which is, there's a place for it. I'm not, we have to get, in order to get to the discipline specific, we have to have those general content understandings of how texts work. But what happened is more and more educators started to really think about, okay, what are the practices that make me successful in my discipline? And it really is, again, around the analysis and the discourse and the deep thinking that a historian uses. I'm looking at Jim, I'm thinking, okay, so historians read texts very differently than a scientist. Historians are looking to check credibility, when the piece was written, who it was written by, what the bias might be. So there's a very different, and they're reading across multiple texts to make sure things line up or don't line up, right, to look. Scientists look to see repetition over time. They're looking to look at theories and how theories are replicated. And so experiments are around repeating to see if you continue to get the same results. So the research has, that the educators and researchers have been leading us toward is really about, we have to ramp it up again, like I said, from the general content area, generic strategies, to actually, what I said earlier, inducting the students into the content and making sure that they're a part of that content and that they can exchange ideas like the experts would.
So there's no specific place you can point to that's trying this, that's a year ahead of Evanston, where you've got sort of a partner where you're looking to see how they're doing professional development, how this is playing out in the classrooms, like,
I think
do you have?
202 is a year ahead of us
Okay.
in our implementation, and those are exactly the conversations that we're having with them.
But there are districts across the country that are really embarking on shifting their curriculum through this disciplinary literacy lens. It's, as often is we're kind of out there in front right now taking the lead on something that, again, it's the Common Core is saying that this is where we need to go. College and career readiness descriptions are saying this is where we need to go. So this sort of thinking, I think, is really mobilizing all teachers toward the same goal. I think that's one of the things that I've noticed as I talk with teachers is we're all really, more than ever, working to point ourselves in the same direction.
We're going to write the book and retire. I think in terms of indications of success, I think there's a couple of things. One is looking at our 5E survey, what our students tell us. Our 6th, 7th, and 8th graders take a survey every year. The results around mathematics instructions, our students tell us, is top of the line, bar none. I mean, 99th percentile across the board in feedback from students around mathematics instruction. So feedback that stays there, and that English language arts instruction begins to catch up to the stratospheric results of our math instruction, we would hope to see that change over time, and that students feel more engaged, more ownership in the classroom. The questions that you can see on the website for the 5E survey around what they're looking for student ownership of their learning, you'd expect to see results there. And while we expect to see dramatic academic growth for all of our students, when we talk with ILT teams next week and really identifying disciplinary literacy, for its disciplinary literacy working as a part of our strategy package of what we're laying out in the strategic plan, really looking first at the students who are proficient and above. Are we pushing the students who are proficient and above and continuing their academic growth? That I think is a major aspect of disciplinary literacy. A reason why we're moving here is to make sure that we're continuing to propel those students. So just another question here, and then go back over here.
Interesting that you should end with that. My question is, as I'm watching what you are doing, and in particular watching the video, I'm noticing that students who have a background in the information already, or some connection to it already, are going to be advantaged. Students with good social skills are going to be advantaged. There's a whole group of students who will be advantaged over other students with this program. And we have a whole group of students who may not have those resources at home, or, you know, or may have disabilities that prevent them from, you know, having good social skills or whatever. How are we going to use this model to make sure that while we're pushing the students at the top, we are not leaving those other students behind? Because just watching those kids put all those words in a line, that's I can see where that's a task that would be particularly challenging for some children. And that, you know, kids can fade into the background when they're struggling with those things.
So I think particularly challenging, but particularly important.
Sure.
So I don't know how else we do it unless we do it. I mean, we've got to teach explicitly listening and speaking skills in the classroom. We've got to teach and develop background because for many of our students, if we don't do it, they may not get it. So it makes that explicit instruction the priority, I think, much more important for the students. But Jamila wanted to go ahead, John.
So one of the ways that we've thought about that very intentionally, particularly partnering with our special services department and our ELL department, making sure, for example, that we're using maybe images, things that are more accessible, that give students the opportunity to generate language, that in the sharing of the conversations, that different kind of text equalizes the opportunity. So it's the same challenge, but there are different access points for students. So we're thinking very intentionally about images, maps, artifacts, those kinds of things that still represent the discipline, you know, the habits of mind and the discipline, but still give access to students who might not have be bringing all the same assets to the table.
I was gonna say, I'm the teacher of those kids, right. And I have to say, it's through modeling, and Demetra kind of started to go here. It's through teaching purposeful talk behaviors. Actually, that took a long time to get there. You know, that was a recent video, but tons of modeling. If you had pulled back, that was actually, the kids were in a fishbowl, and their peers were around them, and those were not my highest, most, you know, they were not kids who came to me ready, you know, able to do that. So what was interesting in that video was kind of like chopped up a little bit to make it shorter for tonight, but that was part of the modeling. They first saw me do it with a few of the kids, and then they formed a circle, and those kids were in the middle, and they were talking through it, and then a few times they were just putting the cards down and not talking, and it was like, wait a minute, you didn't give evidence for why those words should be next to each other. So then another day we did that. So I think Eva can.
So for the Spanish speakers, you see the English speakers speaking Spanish. Well, the wonderful thing about this is that the Spanish speakers that usually don't have the background knowledge with the models for them to bring out this language. So you see that these talking and interchanging has to do with children that are not maybe on the top. They're the ones that are really struggling in some ways, are participating and being a big key.
And then in terms of like shifts from the teacher perspective, now as I am in a new unit of we're studying plants, right away I'm thinking, okay, what vocabulary words can I pull from plants, not to get them to memorize, but to get them to connect and compare and contrast and put them on a continuum like that. So I think what's shifted for us is as teachers we're teammates together, that's what shifted for us in a huge way, like thinking about, I don't just want the kids to know the meaning of all these words, I want them to deeply know them. So that's where the whole idea of putting them on a line and having them give evidence for how they connect, but totally took tons of modeling, for all kids. And across the day, we do this in other ways. Like when we talk about, like Demetra said, when we talk about a fiction story, you might think of the ending as going this way, but I thought the ending went this way, and being able to compare and give evidence for why we thought that way, or why the character is sad. What is it that she said or did that made you feel like she's sad? And being able to give evidence and prove it. That's going on throughout the course of our whole day leading up to.
And you can see these first graders having an opinion first and exchanging ideas, and at the end saying, you know, at the beginning I thought this, but now since I hear so and so, I still think this, but it has changed a little. So you can see that it's not from us to change, their opinions are changing because they hear their classmates. And is that all that collaboration and that intentional talk and
The social
talked about-
emotional learning is huge for that.
I think you just heard a great description of what Principle 4 means in terms of classroom instruction and instructional strategies. Let's take one more question and then we'll break and we can mingle and talk for a few more minutes. So go ahead.
So you talk a lot about this being sort of a new way that you folks as teachers are going at the curriculum. When you roll this out, do you make it explicitly apparent to the kids that, hey, there is this concept of disciplinary literacy? This same exercise you did with us when we walked in the room. Do they get that? Do they get that concept that, hey, yeah, there's reading, but guess what? If you're reading in this situation, it means this. In this situation, it means that. And that, maybe you're not a great fiction reader, but you like this really precise stuff. So reading's, it's not like, ooh, evil, bad reading. No, it's like, oh yeah, I like this kind of reading and this kind of reading. So do these concepts, are they explicitly stated to the kids in some way, shape, or form?
If that's happening now, it's because teachers are way out in front and have been thinking about, so while this is a new organizational framework for our district, this is not a new way of thinking about teaching. And so we've got folks who are thinking this way and are talking to students and modeling and mentoring. Lev Vygotsky talked about this over a century ago. So it's not a new idea, it is a new synthesis of ideas. It is a slightly new name and label. So yeah, I think we do have teachers across our district who are saying, this is how we read for this purpose, and this is how we write for this purpose. And our focus is to make sure that that's embedded explicitly in our curriculum and becomes standard practice across the district. Great. I don't know if you have a close for us, but I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. If you could help me thank the team who presented for you tonight.
For a little bit. I know there's a lot of other knowledgeable parents and staff members in the room, so feel free to kind of seek each other out, because I think it is a concept that we're all still trying to frame and see what it looks like in the classroom. But as we sort of wrap up this year too, I want to acknowledge Karen Young, who's been helping the last 3 years now, putting together curriculum forums. And as we look towards next year, if there are certain concepts, topics, that you would like us to collaborate with the district in presenting and providing more opportunities for parent input, parent interchange with the district, please let us know, whether it's writing a quick note tonight or finding Karen and myself as we move towards looking towards what next year is going to be. So thank you to John and his team. So thanks.